From the four corners of the earth and the far corridors of history. Dateline, World War II. November 1942, New Guinea. With the minds of the American public fixed on the battles raging in North Africa and on Guadalcanal, a good deal less attention is paid to the struggle being waged here. By all measures, it is a conflict as great as any in this war. For months, Australian and American troops have been fighting in malaria-ridden jungles to keep the Japanese from securing this vital island, which lies within striking distance of Australia. The key to the island is Port Moresby on the southeast coast. Foiled in an attempt to launch an amphibious assault on Moresby at the Battle of Coral Sea, the Japanese decided to try an overland route. On 21 July, they landed 5,000 troops near Buna and Gona on the north coast and began the 130-mile drive inland toward Moresby to the south. Fighting on the Kokoda Trail, the Japanese steadily pushed back the Australian troops charged with stopping them. Although they were seasoned veterans of North Africa, the Australians were wholly unprepared to fight in this environment. Inadequate training in jungle warfare was only the beginning. The Australian troops lacked everything from sufficient firepower to proper uniforms. Many veterans of North Africa still wore knee-length khakis, making their silhouettes against the dense green jungle an easy target for Japanese snipers, and their bare legs easy prey for the millions of mosquitoes. For 2 months, the battle raged, exhausting men and resources on both sides. Although the Japanese on the front outnumbered the Australians nearly 5-1, fierce fighting, rampant disease, and major supply problems severely sapped their strength. On 26 September, the Japanese, having advanced within 30 miles of Port Moresby, began to withdraw. At the same time the Japanese started to fall back, the Australians received some much-needed assistance. The U.S. Army's 32nd Division came ashore at Port Moresby. Under the command of Major General Edwin Harding, the men of the Red Arrow Division were to drive north toward Buna on the Kappa Kappa Trail, while to the west, the Australians pushed the Japanese back up the Kokoda Trail. These two trails are, in fact, nothing more than that. At best, only 3 feet wide, they alternate from jagged, rocky ridges to dense jungle. Living and fighting in these conditions is almost unbearable. Everything the men need to fight and to live must be carried in by hand. Using ropes, artillery pieces are hauled up steep mountain paths. Ammunition is carried on the backs of the men or by friendly natives. On 2 November, after a month of fighting to regain lost ground, the Australians captured Kokoda Village, the key to the Owen Stanley Range. Access to the airstrip here makes supplying the troops much easier than carrying everything up the treacherous switchback trails. The celebrations were brief as the weary Aussies moved on, keeping the pressure on the retreating Japanese troops. By mid-November, the Japanese had fallen back to their strongholds at Gona and Buna, and the heavily reinforced garrisons there were well prepared for attacks by the advancing Allied columns. The Australians attacking Gona met ferocious resistance. Japanese units fought to the last man in desperate attempts to hold even the tiniest piece of ground. The Japanese were able to blunt most of the Australian advances until 25 November, when Allied airstrikes followed by a massive artillery barrage cracked the defenses, and the Australians were able to make significant gains. The Americans, however, have been stymied. The Japanese forces at Buna have taken everything the men of the 32nd can give and still have not budged. Although the Japanese have fought well, the American problems are, as much as anything, due to the fact that the men are exhausted, suffering from malaria and dysentery, their boots and clothes rotting, their weapons failing due to the constant exposure to mud and water. The men simply lack the strength to crack the Japanese defense. To General Douglas MacArthur, however, these explanations sound like empty excuses. From his desk in Australia, he is certain that the Americans' lack of success is due to poor leadership, and dispatches Lieutenant General Robert Eichelberger to take command of the attack on Buna. The stage is now set for what is sure to be one of the toughest battles yet for this vital island. The Japanese desperately try to reinforce their garrison as the Allies slowly pick away at the defenses. The men on the ground know all too well how tough the Japanese will fight to retain their foothold here. On the other hand, they are determined to wrest it from their control. They have suffered far too long in the most miserable conditions to be denied now. If driving the Japanese out of Buna and Gona is what they must do to get off this godforsaken island, then that is exactly what they intend to do. December 1942, Berlin. For nearly 3 weeks, Adolf Hitler, conqueror of Europe and the leader of what he believes to be God's chosen people, has lived with the unthinkable indignity of having the entire German Sixth Army held captive by a nation he believes to be racially, morally, and militarily inferior: Soviet Russia. In mid-November, Hitler and the Sixth, under the command of General Friedrich von Paulus, seemed to be on the brink of completing their continental conquest. Despite exhausted troops and supply shortages, Stalingrad, the keystone that would surely topple the walls of Fortress Russia, seemed to be theirs for the taking. Then, in a turn of events Hitler and the Nazi high command thought impossible, the Red Army, driving from the north and south, encircled the city, and with it an entire German army. Hitler is appalled. Still, he is convinced that the Russian success is merely a temporary setback, and in keeping with this reasoning, he and his commanders are committed to taking back the initiative. 60 miles south of Stalingrad, at the city of Kotelnikovo, 13 German divisions fire the opening shots of Operation Winter Storm. Spearheading the attack, the tanks of the 23rd Panzer Division smash into the unsuspecting and ill-prepared Soviet 51st Army. Driving hard across the snow-covered plains, the Nazi tanks and troops smash into the Russian defenses, driving them back on their heels. With reinforcements several days away, the Third Reich troops enjoy advances as rapid as the early days of Operation Barbarossa. In Moscow, Joseph Stalin and his deputy commander-in-chief, Georgy Zhukov, are stunned at the sudden turn of events. Still, they keep their wits about them. Rather than panic and divert masses of men and materiel to drive the Germans back, they dispatch enough support to slow the attack, and on 14 December, they begin the next phase of their plan to drive the Nazis out of Russia. From the area near Kalach, where the Russians had completed their encirclement of Stalingrad, Soviet troops begin driving to the southwest. Once again, Stalin and Zhukov have chosen a weak point in the German lines, and as the Nazis continue to push north toward their besieged comrades, the Red Army begins to move rapidly to the south. For days, the two forces continue their counter-movements, both advancing. But as the respective battles drag on, the Germans seem to be slowing, while the Russians build up steam. By 19 December, the Wehrmacht has stalled completely. They continue to fight, but make no headway. Inside the Stalingrad pocket, the besieged Nazi troops can hear the guns of their would-be rescuers, but tired, starving, and short of fuel, they too are unable to break through the Soviet circle. Meanwhile, the Red Army continues to advance to the south, and it is becoming apparent to German generals trying to break through to Stalingrad, as well as the generals in the Caucasus region to the southeast, that the Soviets are headed to the town of Rostov, where the Don River flows into the sea. As Christmas comes and goes, it becomes clear to these generals that the attempt to liberate the Sixth Army trapped at Stalingrad has failed. But Hitler and his advisors refuse to acknowledge the obvious, and all talk of withdrawal is summarily dismissed as cowardice. The field generals are beginning to wonder if the Fuhrer and his cronies are looking at the same maps they are, or even the lowest private plotting the movements of the Red Army would be able to see what the Soviet intentions are: to drive to Rostov, and in doing so, isolate all the German troops east of a line stretching from Stalingrad to the Black Sea. This time, however, if they are successful, Stalin and Zhukov will trap not just an army, but an entire army group, including the men who have fought so valiantly to save their suffering brothers at Stalingrad.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
It has been a year since those fateful words echoed over the airwaves of the country, forever changing the lives of Americans everywhere. Since those black days at the end of 1941, America has changed dramatically. Gone are the laments of isolationist groups demanding America stay out of foreign wars. They have given way to an enormous surge of patriotism and unity of purpose. Americans everywhere have done whatever is necessary to bolster the war effort, and nowhere is this more apparent than in Hawaii. In the hours after the attack, things here looked bleak indeed. Far removed from the security of the continental U.S., and with the bulk of the fleet burning in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the symbol of American strength in the Pacific, was a plum ripe for the picking. Through the extraordinary sacrifices of the people here, however, that is no more. Hawaii has been transformed from a vacation paradise to an armed camp bristling with activity. The beautiful beaches where tourists used to frolic in the sun and surf are now heavily patrolled and strung with miles of barbed wire. What had been a vibrant nightlife has been nearly snuffed out by a dusk till dawn blackout order. Along with reading and writing, school children have daily air raid drills and learn how to use a gas mask. The most dramatic change, however, is to be found at Pearl Harbor itself. Captain H.N. Wallen, the Bureau of Ships expert on salvage and repair, and the men under his command have done what anyone here a year ago would have deemed impossible. Massive dreadnoughts that were little more than smoldering wrecks slowly bleeding oil into the Pacific are now well on their way to renewed service. The men doing the work are members of Naval Construction Battalions, or Seabees. After the attack, the Seabees' ranks swelled as thousands of skilled construction workers volunteered to do whatever was needed to carry the war back to the Japanese. Divers, welders, and mechanics, working 24 hours a day above and below the water, labor to restore the proud old battle wagons to their former glory. The fact that this is possible at all is in large measure thanks to mistakes made by the Japanese. Intoxicated by the sight of Battleship Row and Hickam Field in flames, the Japanese pilots neglected to target Pearl's dry docks or repair shops. Certain that they had done irreparable damage to the fleet, they failed to ensure these vital facilities could not be used to salvage the wreckage. Of the 8 battleships damaged in the attack, 5 have been salvaged. The California, the Nevada, the West Virginia, the Tennessee, and the Maryland are all nearing operational status. However, the Utah, the Arizona, and the Oklahoma have seen their last battle. Now, a year after their entry into the war, Americans everywhere have pulled together like never before. But for the people who were here on December 7th, 1941, there is a special sense of pride. Rather than listening to the proclamations of Japanese military leaders who boasted of the utter destruction of the Pacific Fleet, they have taken what was a disaster and turned it into a triumph. They are certain that victory will be theirs, and that the Japanese will soon feel the wrath of guns they thought they had silenced forever. Of all the industrial developments that have resulted from America's involvement in the Second World War, there is perhaps none so impressive as the advances in the construction of commercial vessels. Known as the Liberty Fleet, these vessels are the fruits of the labor of thousands of workers. Their contribution to the war effort, while not glamorous, is crucial. They have devised a means of building ships faster than Hitler's submarine wolf packs can sink them. The Liberty ships, or as President Roosevelt likes to call them, ugly ducklings, are based upon a design submitted to the U.S. by Britain. It differed from traditional shipbuilding in that the steel plates of the hull were welded rather than riveted together. While welding takes considerably less time and manpower than riveting, it yields a joint of comparable strength. Now, welding has been adopted by shipyards across the country. The building process has been further expedited by individual workers who have begun to figure out ways to perform their tasks faster and better. Techniques developed in one shipyard quickly spread to others, honing the process down until the time it takes to complete a single ship is incredibly brief. In California's Kaiser shipyards, workers build a ship in just 4 days and 15 hours. This kind of performance is possible because Liberty ships are not built from the ground up in a single shipyard. Instead, parts of the ships are prefabricated around the country. Engines, steel plates, and other necessities are shipped to the coast from the country's interior. Thus, manpower from all over the country can be applied to a single ship simultaneously, completing in 2 or 3 weeks what once took an entire year. The demand for ships has created an army of new shipbuilders. They are a hodgepodge of skilled and unskilled laborers. Housewives work alongside their husbands, as men and women alike are trained in welding and the use of heavy equipment. As the workers watch the product of their labors slide into the water, they know that they are doing more than launching a ship. They are empowering the entire American industrial base. Medicine, weapons, rations, and all the tools of war sit waiting on docks in anticipation of each Liberty ship that floats off the line. The men and women who are in charge of shipping these items out, secretaries, clerks, longshoremen, work in concert to quickly deliver hundreds of tons of supplies overseas. Though the Liberty ships can achieve a speed of only 12 knots, they seem an appropriate symbol of the war on the home front. The value of the Liberty fleet does not stem from its speed, but, like the nation which built it, from the strength of a large group of individuals pushing steadily toward a common goal.